you very much. Thank you everybody for joining. Anat, thank you for co-hosting this webinar. So I guess everybody is pretty shocked about these historical events that are occurring. Many people feel, or at least thought, that we are living in an era where we won't see big scale wars as we saw in the past. In the Second World War, who would have imagined thousands of tanks storming a country? And I think that we need to really try and understand what is happening on the global level. Why is this occurring? I mean, the easiest way to analyze what's going on is say, okay, listen, this guy is crazy. Many people say that. They look at Putin and say, this is a crazy person and he's doing crazy things, and this is why it's happening. I think both Anat and I share a different view that this is more complicated. There are many interests, real interests on the table. And without understanding really what's going on, it would be very, very difficult to try and think what we can change, what we can do differently. So we'll try to analyze what is happening. And I will start with a few minutes of the way I understand what is going on globally before we talk about the fighting in Ukraine itself. And we'll give Anat understanding and insights about these issues. And from there, we'll go and talk about what's going on the ground in the fighting in Ukraine. And also we'll talk about how it's affecting Israel. At the end of the day, we want to understand how this is affecting us. So basically, looking at what's going on globally, what we see today is two huge nations that feel that they don't have or don't get the right place in this global arena. I'm talking about China and Russia. They feel that there is a very strong dominance of America in the global sphere, and America is basically running everything on the global arena. And as growing powers, Russia getting stronger after the break of the USSR, Russia feels that it's getting stronger and it deserves a stronger place on the global arena. And China, of course, is growing very, very fast with a huge economy, with a huge army that is being built. And these two big nations are trying to change the status quo that has been for many, many years. China looking towards Taiwan and wanting to get hold of Taiwan, and Russia looking to this. This is one thing that is going on in this contest between the East and the West. The other thing is that nations overall throughout history, talking about wars and peace, they look mainly at three things when they take decision. They are driven by national pride, and if they feel that something in this national pride was hurt, they tend to retaliate. They are driven fear, that they might be attacked or somebody wants to attack them, and therefore many times they go to war out of fear. And the other issue is that they want to get power. They want to get power, talking about political power, economical power, cultural power, different kinds of power that nations seek. Looking at the Russians, we can say that basically all these three phenomena are happening, and not now. It didn't start now. It started long ago. To Western society, this seems strange. What do you mean? Why should they fear? Why would they fear? Well, the Russians have a long history of Western conquers against Russia, whether it was the Swedish, whether it was Napoleon, whether it was the Germans in the Second World War. And when I said that, one of the TV appearances, one of the reactions was, hey, Amir, what does it have to do with anything? We're talking about 1945. So I said, look, guys, we, the Jewish people, we talk about things like that happened 3,500 years ago, like it was yesterday. For example, our exodus from Egypt, or the occupation of the Greeks or the Romans, the Maccabees, and so on. We live these things as if they were yesterday. Nations have long memory. And looking at Russia, although Russia is a very, very big country, the heart of Russia at the end of the day is Moscow, and Moscow is only 100 kilometers from its western border. And when the Russians see NATO year from year moving towards them, this is something that makes them feel that they might be in danger. It's also steps on their national pride, the way they see it and understand it. And also, being a nation that wants to be influential, they seek the opportunity, and they've been doing that for many, many years. So there are many things that are going on with the Russians, and by the way, they talk about it, they write about it all the time, and I'm sure that Anat can elaborate more about this interest. Anat, please.
First of all, thank you very much. I'm very honored and happy to be here, although you cannot see me, and I hope it will be correct, will be in a few minutes. Anyway, I'm really honored to be here today. So thank you very much in advance, Amir, and all of you that just gathered together to have this important meeting. I would like to share with you something that just happened 10 days ago, if I'm not wrong, or 9 days ago, because I don't have the hours and the time already, because almost I don't sleep so well lately. And it was last Tuesday morning at 6 a.m. that I was called by one of the Tel Aviv Israeli TV media producer that asked me to wake up, and he's very sorry to wake me up at 6 o'clock and said, Russia invaded to Ukraine. This is the beginning of a new era. You have to wake up and be with us noontime, and to have some commentary regarding what Russia is doing and what's going on here. And I must share with you this experience, which just shows us that the address is on the wall for a couple of months or years. And I think the West, all of us in the West, may be, I would say it very cautiously, but would say, put it forward, are they kind of maybe ignorance or a time of illusion that Russia does not have any intention to invade Ukraine. And I would put it straightforward. Russia had planned it for 20 years. It's a very detailed plan, strategic plan, not only to conquer Ukraine, but I would say it, again, cautiously here, to have a turning point in the international order and to, I wouldn't say topple the hegemony of the US, but to change the international order. And it's a lot more, it's wider and very complicated issue. Once we have to wake up and see, like a wake-up call, and see that what we had 10 days ago, it's not what we have today, and not what we are going to face in the near future. And if we look at the strategic way of attacking Ukraine, we all witness some kind of aggressive and I would say militaristic, nihilistic way of occupy with conquer, I would say, Ukraine. and put aside all the international law and all the stuff and all the other issues concerning the international norms, laws, etc., etc. It's an aggressive way to put a new world order and to expect from the West to understand what's going on here. I know it's very tough to maybe to grasp it, maybe to digest it. But from my point of view, as more than 20 years of academic research, Russia, the West, and China as well, I mean, the geopolitical hegemony entities in the international order, I would say that from my point of view, it's not a surprise. It's more than it. It's a surprise. We are in the West do not understand what's going on. And we do not understand that we do not understand. So maybe a kind of new, I would say it's again, very, in a way of, here I am, sorry for missing me, thank you. I would say again, maybe to put it in another way of, it's a paradigmatic shift. It's a kind of transition from a very normal international order to abnormal, to something which we do not want to cope with yet, but it's a very aggressive way to shift our mind to something new, something very militaristic. That's the way, this is the language of the Russian, I wouldn't say empire because it's not an empire. It's Putin's way of, it's Putin's policy, Russian policy. So it's only the beginning.
Right, thank you, Anna. So really going back and talking, many people are starting to ask about Israel. So maybe before we go into Ukraine, I'll say something that about Israel. First of all, Israel, the Israeli government need first and foremost to deal with Israel's national security. So the question that Israel asks itself, what is our interest? What do we need? What can we say? What we cannot say? From a moral point of view, obviously being part of the Western world, we think that an attack on a sovereign country is a terrible thing to do. And of course, it's something that will have a terrible effect on life and the security of the people of Ukraine. And this is why Israel is sending humanitarian aid, and this is why Israel in the UN condemned the fact that the Russians invaded Ukraine. But having said that, Israel needs to be very, very careful in the way it deals with this issue, talking about the Russians, because the Russians are present in the northern border of Israel. We need full freedom of operation in Syria. And this freedom of operation that enables us to deal with a huge threat of missiles from Hezbollah and Iranian forces that are trying to reach our borders is dependent almost completely on Russian willingness to let us fly in this area. They have very, very advanced anti-air missiles in Syria, which they are not operating. They are not giving it to the Syrians, but they are operating these batteries themselves. And we are coordinated with the Russians, and they enable us to fly without needing to fight Russia. And the same goes from Iran. I mean, all of us understand that Iran is an existential threat. We all understand that Israel, unfortunately, stands alone, and we need to be able to defend ourselves by ourselves and be able to attack an Iranian nuclear plant if needed. And being able to do it also depends on coordination with the Russians, and the Russians not giving the Iranians very, very advanced capabilities against us. So Israel cannot afford to have Russia as an enemy. Therefore, we are very, very careful the way we're addressing this huge crisis. We want to side on one hand with the Ukrainians and help. On the other side, we need to keep good relations with the Russians. And I think that the Israeli government is doing exactly that. It's doing exactly that. You need to be clever. Some people tend to completely disregard national interests and say, no, you need to give the Ukrainians weapons. You need to completely side with the Ukrainians. You need to completely condemn the Russians. And I'm telling you guys, this is not how life works. We need to defend the people of Israel. We need this coordination with the Russians. And therefore, Israel is very, very careful in the way it's handling itself in this crisis. But I can tell you, for example, that in the border today around Ukraine, all the doctors that are treating people in the borders are Israelis. Okay, nobody is getting close. Israelis are getting close. Israelis are assisting medically in every way possible. Of course, we have many, many teams that are helping Jews who are fleeing the area to come to Israel and make Aliyah. We are also bringing Ukrainians who are not Jews, who have families here, to stay here meanwhile while there is a war in Ukraine. So we're doing all the things we can do without undermining our most basic interest, talking about our needs and relationship with the Iranians. In this sense, Anat, maybe you can say, you know, it's Russia, Ukraine, but maybe you can say something about China and its role in this event, especially in the connection of the huge sanctions so now imposed Russians.
Yes, we have to take into consideration China's position here, which tries to keep itself very neutral and to declare, and I would put it that way, try to avoid any participation, any involvement in any conflict around the world, which means China doesn't want and won't take any further steps except for financial support to the Russian government. As far as the Chinese Olympic, the Winter Olympic Games in Beijing a month ago, and 2 weeks ago, it just ended. That was the timing for a Russian invasion to Ukraine. It says a lot of, it gives us more than hints that something is going together here. They have the partnership, geostrategic partnership between themselves. These two huge powers. So when we look, and I just want to follow you, Amir, when we look at the trio, at what's going on here between Israel, China, and Russia, and I would say, let's put it for the meanwhile, let's put the US aside. We have to jungle, like balls that we have to jungle with, not to on one hand to enjoy the kind of I would say liberty to play with, as far as we don't put any further steps against somebody else. And I think here that if I can explain myself, clearly, I would say that it's a lot more than to be supported by the US. We have to be very, I would say, manipulative or smart enough to know how to jungle between the balls in order to have all of the powers supporting us, and not that we are against one of these three powers. If I was, if I may say, clear enough, and I have to, to maybe to re-articulate myself, let's put the two giants here, Russia and the US, and to make it more complicated, add China into the game here, and to say the Middle East is going and already going to be a lot more important as far as Ukraine is going to be occupied by the Russian power, because it's like a transition that the US would like to go back again after she left the Iraq and Syria. She will come back to the Middle East, and then Russia will come back to the Middle East, and then China will come back to the Middle East, and all the attention will be towards Israel. So it's only timing here that that's why as we just spoke, Amir, it is so important to make Israel a lot more stronger than we are now, because we cannot trust any of these three powers to be supported by. We have to have our own strength and power and to project it outside.
Right. So yes, I agree with Anat. Another thing we can say that is affecting Israel. You know that we with the Europeans, our relations are not always the best, especially not with the Northern European countries like Sweden, like Finland, and so on. And things now are changing. I mean, the one thing that is changing is because NATO countries are petrified from Russia. I mean, think about it. Russia is attacking Ukraine with 12,000 tanks, and I'm not talking about the huge air force they have and all these capabilities. Britain, the empire where the sun never set down, 150 tanks. Germany, less than 400 tanks. It's inconceivable. There is no army in Europe. So what is happening is they are shocked, and they need to strengthen their security. So basically, in the last few months, the Ministry of Defense has signed huge contracts, government to government, with many European, Northern and West and Eastern countries. So the importance of Israel in Europe, talking about our ability to assist with our knowledge and know-how and technology and so on, places us in a completely different place. And this is something that is impacting Israel in a good way. Another thing that is important, and it relates to one of the questions here about energy. Israel, as you know, in the last few years has huge potential to export gas in Europe, in Western Europe, basically because there was a huge trend of green energy. And green energy is not stable. You cannot rely on sun, and you cannot rely on the wind. There is lack of energy in Europe. So the Russians are taking advantage of that because they are the main suppliers of gas to Europe. And without Russian gas, there is not enough energy in Europe. So Israel is in the future a very strong ally talking about energy. Who would have thought that one day Israel will become an energy power? But this is exactly what is happening. And the prices are rising. So this strengthens us a lot. And therefore, I agree with Anat. There is a lot of opportunities, and we need to be careful the way we deal with the different powers. Of course, our main ally is the US. But still, in a world with emerging powers, Israel needs to know how to jungle, as Anat said, and really work with all the countries. But at this stage, I would like to really talk about what Russia is doing in Ukraine and how the West is reacting to that. First of all, to me at least, a month and a half ago, it was clear that they are going to invade Ukraine. Okay, I don't know what people were surprised. but it seemed very, very clear. And when I looked at the beginning of the invasion, one of the things that was really clear to me, this is not a blitzkrieg, meaning this is not an attack intended to conquer Ukraine in 2 or 3 days. If you want to conquer a country in 2 or 3 days, you take your whole air force, all your capabilities, and you utilize huge power to support the ground forces and move in very, very fast. But Russia said, no, we are going in slowly. We don't want to hit civilians. We want to do it step by step. So my assessment is that the way the Russians think, okay, and here there's a cultural gap. The Russians were saying to themselves, we explain to the West what our interests are. We need to be the dominant country controlling Ukraine. We are going in slowly. What we expect the West to do is understand that Ukraine needs to be on the Russian side and make the steps for this to happen. And we will be careful because the Ukrainians are part of us. They are part of the Russian nation, the way they see it and so on. But the way the West looked at it, first of all, they were saying, hey, look, the Russians are not succeeding. They are not succeeding to conquer Ukraine in 2 days. The Ukrainians are managing to defend and so on. And also because of they were frightened from this war, they retaliated in the most extreme way that is not militarily, huge sanctions, like an atomic bomb of sanctions. They threw everything on the Russians, okay? Everything they had, they shot all the munition. They are talking about economy, almost all of it. And at this stage, Putin says, okay, they shot at me everything. Now, I have nothing to lose. I mean, they already made the hugest sanctions they can impose on me. They are not listening to what I'm saying. They don't understand what we want. So I am going all out. And now I'm going to attack Ukraine and I will invade it. And the winning will be decisive. And this is devastating for Ukraine, devastating. Because now he's going to utilize all his power, which he didn't do before. And of course, we see it every day. It's getting stronger and stronger, the attack. And he starting to conquer the ports, Mariupol, later on Odessa. This is the main 2 ports of Ukraine. Of course, getting closer to Kiev. He already conquered the city called Kherson. And he's moving forward. And at his pace, Russians have their own pace. They don't work in Western pace. They have their own pace, and they are moving forward, disregarding completely anything that the West is doing. Now, my question, and Anat, I will ask you what you think about that, is, look, there's 2 ways that this thing can move forward. One, that these huge sanctions that were imposed on Russia, this is at the moment the ultimate weapon the Western world is willing to utilize, will be so devastating that it will stop the war. And this will be history. It will be the first time in the history of mankind that economical sanctions stop tanks. Okay? But what will happen if it doesn't work? And it's not stopping. So, Anat, what do you think about that?
First answer, wishful thinking. Second answer, this is the reality.
Well, you don't think that sanctions are going to stop the Russians?
I would say it very clearly, it's a kind of antibiotics or an aspirin to something that is taken for 8 years And not only that it does not stop Putin from invasion, I think it's a kind of, and I would like to take you with me towards something which is illusionary maybe, but it's the reality. It's maybe even igniting, or how to say, putting him forward, you know, try to, how do you call it? Whoa, I have the words. Something that causes you to work harder in order to get your goals, to achieve your goals. Like if it's something like you put a plaster on something like against cancer, okay? Not to mention any other harsh sickness, but what I want to say is that Russian leader get used to the idea that that Russia is under international sanctions since 2015. Having said that, he has all the options since then to prepare and to be prepared for any other next sanctions that will be put on Russia. And that's why he signed the strategic agreement with China, and that's why he had the oligarch, which may be used as alternative financial power to Russia.
And I want to ask you something. I mean, what would be the outcome in the long term? How would China and Russia in the future will overcome the possibility of the West to impose sanctions on them? What I mean, I can tell you from the military world that anything you develop, any new capability, the other side learns it and finds solutions how to overcome it.
Right.
So what would be the way that the East will deal with the tendency of the West to use economical means instead of military means?
If I understood you correctly, I would say that the international sanction and the economic sanctions right away will also not only stop Putin, on the contrary, it will encourage him to continue. And why? Because once he sees the weakness of the West, and once the global economic is being hurt harder than Russia itself, or let's put it, he doesn't care about Russia economic at this point of time. It may be very hurtful at the near future, but for the meanwhile, it will not stop him. He sees weakness as a source of encouragement, of something that, you know, like just the opposite of rational, the opposite of the liberal rationality. The one what we see as a weakness, he sees as a greatness, and the opposite. So, and I just want to follow what you said before. You mentioned Russia, and I would say that Putin's language equal or equates power, and power means not only militarily power, but a holistic power. He believes himself in very inner strength, in inner power, and the capability to cause harm, to absolutely change the international order, and to have new world order, a new status quo in Europe and elsewhere. So I think from my point of view, as I do research and just analyzing the geopolitical map right away, he utilizes the weakness of the West, the weakness of Biden government, and the position that we're in the West only condemn it, or only give them, you know, like put economic sanctions, but it's like, I would say something like he could imagine that it will happen, but I think it's the problem here is that the West underestimates the intentions of Putin.
Right. So, one of the questions that people ask you is whether once Putin will manage to conquer Ukraine, will he attack other states? Well, I think that first of all, from my experience of what it means to operate an army and conquer a state the size of Ukraine, I don't think it would be very easy for him to immediately move to the army and go and conquer somewhere else. Getting control of Ukraine is a big deal. It's a huge country, and it's not going to happen so fast. But it doesn't need to conquer more countries in order to create a situation where these countries understand that they need to start moving towards the Russian side. I can say that even the Germans are being very careful in the way they're treating the Russians. And Germany has a long history, because they are in the middle between France, Britain, and so on, and on the other side, they are quite close to Russia. The Germans are very careful not to insult the Russians, and they have allied with them in the past many times.
And this is the reason, exactly, that Putin recognizes and identifies this weakness. And the intention that from the West, from Germany, as well as the other European countries and the US, that nobody will stop him and nobody will stop his aggression. And that's what inspires him, what motivates him, what causes him to continue.
Right. And so obviously Russia will try to spread the influence over the East. Now they sent two clear messages to NATO. They were very clear. They sent two papers. They asked America and NATO to sign them. One paper says to the US, take your missiles from here and get out. Go back to the US. Don't put any soldiers, American soldiers, on European soil. This is not where you belong. This is one clear message Putin conveyed to the US. The other message was to Europe. He said to them, I want you to go back to 1999, before you started spreading NATO into the East, before Czechoslovakia, Poland, all these countries joined. I want you to retreat back to the West. All these countries are part of you call it the Russian hemisphere. And even if I attack these countries, NATO are not allowed to intervene. So how bold is it to ask this from the West? It's so obviously it's because he feels they're so weak, and he can demand things that would be incomprehensible a decade ago. But even before he attacked Ukraine, he made these demands to the West, which of course were not met. But this is the way he thinks about these issues. Now, as we are talking about Ukraine and Russia, there is the Iranian issue. And the talks with Iran, and it's amazing, really amazing to see that while the West is supposed to think about how to build deterrence, they are completely surrendering to Iran. Now, it's one thing to be afraid of Russia, but Iran, I mean, Iran, the US in 5 minutes can destroy this country. It's troubling, because if I would advise Biden, I would say to him, listen, you made US a joke, no deterrence. And if you want to build deterrence again, one place you can do it is Iran. Why not attack the Iranian nuclear plan? I mean, this is a good way to build deterrence. And you don't need ground forces, you don't need to fight tanks. You just need to take your Air Force, one major attack, and that's it. So the fact that the US is surrendering to Iran, wanting to lift the sanctions, wanting to sign a terrible agreement that is even worse than the previous one, which basically enables the Iranians to, in a few years, to get as many nuclear weapons as they want. It's very bad news. It's bad news for all the Middle East. And I'm worried that in the relationship we have with the Sunni states, Abraham Accords, two things might happen. They can rely more on Israel and get closer to us because of this threat, or do what I see that they're already doing, talking more and more to Iran. If the Sunni world will feel that they completely cannot trust the US and that Israel cannot take the role of the US and they need to get closer to Iran and Russia, they will do that. And this is very dangerous for us. So definitely we would advise the US to build a deterrent through the Middle East and through their dealing with Iran, because already China and Russia is a big deal. Having another nuclear state that has global aspirations, I don't know if you know it, but Iran is operating all over Northern Africa, all the way to Morocco. Iran is operating in South America. Iran is even operating in Canada. The last thing the world needs is another power emerging and threatening the world. And this is something we need to find a way to make the American establishment understand, because if they don't understand, they leave us alone to deal with this huge threat. And we're preparing for that, but it's not a good solution. A good solution would be for the US to lead and do what the US needs to do, to be a global power. Anat?
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to say, that it's a kind of a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call, not only to us, it's a wake-up call to everybody, and especially the American government. Because once Biden do not, I would say it again, very cautiously, but I would say once he does not try to halt Putin and to put a kind of military buffer, nothing will happen, and Russia will, swallow Ukraine and go into the next other European countries. And as I mentioned before, power against power, not power against will. And only if, and it's a kind of, that's why I say it's a wake-up call, only if it's a kind of paradigmatic shift and the US will understand that it has to take a position which is not to be passive, but only active in a kind of, I would say, even moving tanks and artillery into Ukraine soil. Again, it's very complicated, and it can ruin it can do something very, very bad maybe over here, but it signals and transmit messages, very active messages against Russia, and only power against power will stop it.
So you believe that the West needs to mobilize their military against Russia?
Non-conditionally. I mean, I don't see any other way around in order to start to stop Putin. And maybe
you should run for presidency in the US.
Yeah,
they need a tough movement.
I think that I would say yes. I must share with you that today I was interviewed to several radio interviews, and they just 10 minutes later it was all over here, all over the country. That Anat said is we are under the Third World War. I said I did it, and I said so courteously in order to do like, let's wake up. It's not only a war against Ukraine or to invade Ukraine. It's against our peace. our next generation, against our kids. It's against not only the Ukraine, but the Western world. And it's a time to take off the gloves and to start to go against Putin.
Right. Well, one of the, I see questions about comparison to BDS and whether Ukraine is like Judan Samaria and things like that. I don't really think that this is something that is on the table. That I see even the opposite. There's a funny thing going on that the Ukrainians are using photos used usually by Palestinian propaganda. For example, there is this girl Tamimi who always attacks soldiers and poses as if soldiers are molesting her and so on. Now the Ukrainians are using her photo and saying that she's an Ukrainian girl that is shouting at the Russian soldiers. So the Palestinians are really fed up because all their propaganda now is moving to Ukraine. The next thing will be a picture of Ukraine saying that Ukraine will be free from the river to the sea. And that's it for the Palestinian propaganda. So the Palestinians they're really are not happy about what's going on because everything now is about Ukraine and not about them. And also they understand that probably hundreds of thousands of Jews are going to make Aliyah to Israel. For us, it's very good news. For the Palestinians, not so much. So I don't think that the world has now time to really deal with what's going on in Israel. So I hope we have time to deal with what's going on in Israel because we have a lot of work here. The world is going to be very, very busy dealing with the Russians and the Chinese, because I hope you understand that the Chinese are preparing for their own aspirations, and they have their own plans.
Yeah, the BRI initiation all over the world, including Iran, including Syria, which is just our neighbors here. Although Israel is also as a part of this huge project, but we have to take into consideration that they are also militarizing our neighbors.
So what do you think is the chance that China will, in the coming year, invade Taiwan?
Yesterday I was concerned about that it's more than 50%. Today it's a kind of wherever the winds goes, the chances are going, because we cannot know what's going on inside Xi Jinping's mind. And it's not only the liberal rationality, it's the Chinese rationality, which is a lot far away from what we think about. They are more concerned about the internal factors that influence his policy outside China. It's not what Russia will do or not do. I mean, it's concerned. This is different perspective when we are talking about, but I would also say that once Putin goes into and conquer Ukraine, it's a kind of stimulator. It's a kind of huge motivator for China to consider it very seriously and to invade, not to invade, but to conquer Taiwan. But then the US will be involved and directly involved, and it's a whole big issue that I would recommend to have another webinar because it's a lot more complicated. I would just say very shortly that as compared to Ukraine, which is not strategic interest of the US, as compared to Taiwan is very strategic, important security interest for the US. And if the US is not involved here in Ukraine, it will be involved and deeply involved in Taiwan. And then again, all the shifts, all the geostrategic shifts around the world, which will do I would say it's deterioration in the security realm, and then we are in another very tough position. And if you take it together, the Ukraine crisis and Taiwan crisis, 1 + 1 is never 2, is a lot more than 3. So then we'll have to go to shelters and not to stay here and speak tonight in the webinar.
Yeah, so one of the questions that people are talking about is, how are the Russians themselves reacting to what Putin is doing? Will they revolt? Are they angry? And so on. First of all, it's hard to say. We have to see what these sanctions really are going to do to the Russian people and how it will affect them. But I think there is a tendency in the Western world of wishful thinking and thinking that Russians think like Western people. They don't. They're motivated by national pride. They will look at how decisive the win is going to be in Ukraine, and how this is going to be marketed to the Russian people. So, we're not prophets. We don't know what will happen, and the Russian economy is not that strong. But I think that Putin is enjoying quite a lot of support. The Russians are proud people. They want to be strong and become an empire as they were before. And they're willing to fight. Now, I don't know if you know it, but 20% of Russia is Muslim. 40% of the Russian army are Muslims. All these Chechens and so on that are fighting now in Ukraine, the Christian Russians are not that, okay, let the Muslims go and fight. These are most of the fighters. So many of the Russians are not that preoccupied about the fact that there are some Russian soldiers killed. So what do you think about the future, talking about how the Russians will react about this?
I think the internal opposition in Russia is not as important for Putin. Once there is an opposition, I would say it very clearly, he put it in jail, put in people, just to cause them to go away, to kill them. I mean, like shooting in the street and so on. But it's, it's only what's written in press. I mean, I'm not sure about what's going on today at the moment regarding the opposition there. But I think one of the issue here is also important to raise is the resilience of the Ukraine public, which is very strong. Part of them, or I don't know exactly what the percentage of the Jews over there, but they are very strong in mind and in a fiercely battle against Russia. They use the Molotov bottles as compared to the tanks and artillery that Russian hits Ukraine. So it's like an elephant and a butterfly that goes once again the other. But it's very important that at least the resilience of the public, or the public opinion, the public strength is very appreciable. And we have to help them in any means, by any means, to help them, either morally, psychologically, or it's a humanitarian crisis already, and it's going to be a lot tougher. I'm not talking only about the Jews over there. I'm talking about the people of Ukraine. And whatever we can do, we do have to do at the moment, and not to wait another week or another month, because it's going to take a long time, a lot more than we see from now. I mean, it's nobody knows, and I'm not dealing with predictions. I'm not astrologian, and I don't want to deal with it. I mean, what we see is the facts, and we cannot ignore it anymore.
Anat, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed hosting with you this webinar. And there's a lot to talk about. We have to talk about Iran. We have to talk about what's going on inside Israel. the fighting in Ukraine continues, but there will be more webinars to come. And I want to thank you all our listeners that were in this webinar. We're looking forward to talk to you again. Thank you very much.